on to itself as a species level and would alter its behavior to harmonize with universe, and so, say, would peacefully give up the powers that be in the hierarchical model and rapidly evolve itself into a state one civilization in which we had a fractal model of organization and education, and would go on from there. I don't know that we really qualify as a smart species and whether we'll apply that stuff to ourselves. But we could if we wanted. There's nothing stopping us. And sure. This is the really weird part. Yes, we're at a resource limitation all around the planet. We've run into the fisheries resource limitation, the air limitation, water limitation, and so on and so on. But that limitation, as we've been told, is due only to the control structure that's been posed on us. If we didn't fish this way, fisheries are sustainable. If we didn't harvest lumber this way, lumber is sustainable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it is not a naturally occurring situation that brings our species to the edge of the petri dish under the current condition. It is a control structure that, so far as we can tell, did not exist in previous cycles. And I don't think will exist very much longer, to be honest. It's fracturing all over the place. Whether they're able to wrest control through the process of transformation is an open question.
Okay, so as the veil thins, you don't think that it's possible that we would start to awaken en masse?
I think that may be the case, but it may be too late at that point.
I see.
It may be too late already for the masses to awaken, because the next generation of humans genetically may be at this point being eliminated through radiation, and our species is probably not waking up to that effect. We've already suffered the infertility problems that go along with the predictable infertility problems that go along with the end of the sunspot cycle, and that really puts a lot of species at risk. So we're seeing a lot of the species extinction is a natural sort of the part of things, and I think the powers that be are simply using the feather against 10,000 pounds approach to first isolate the northern hemisphere atmospherically and oceanographically, and then pollute it until a certain percentage of us die, and that's probably a fairly high percentage.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that any given individual will die sooner than their karma would allow. I mean, it gets really complicated when you start thinking about it at that level.
Right.
You're bringing in individual and collective karma. Nonetheless, there is a deliberate risk to us all that a sane individual in our species sitting here saying, the background radiation has gone up 30 times and shows no sign of reducing itself. This is not the way it is north of 50 or south of the equator. Maybe I'd better move. Really that would be the rational response, but we don't see it happening.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, there's been something that I've been pondering, and I'd like your thoughts on the process of reincarnation and death being another layer of illusion. When individuals like Daniel Brinkley, Betty Eades, and countless others have gone to the light and returned with experiences of seeing their families, their pets, etc., and they come back with messages for humanity, I think their experiences are credible, and I believe that they believe their experiences are credible. But I'm wondering if this, too, is another level of control and illusion, and until we spiritually break that cycle, we are bound to this planet or to keep reincarnating here. I personally have had recall of past lives, but reincarnation no longer makes sense to me. What are your thoughts regarding the ability to break through the reincarnation level or illusion so that we can ascend even further onto our soul's journey, whatever that may be?
Okay, it's my thoughts are on a couple of different levels. It's a very complex sort of a subject. So let's just look at the idea of reincarnation. How could I, if I die now, experience a contact with my father or my brother if both have previously died and have reincarnated as the many people assume occurs? Vast quantities, Buddhists, etc.
Right.
How would that be possible? Because theoretically they're already in some other body somewhere. Well,
right.
having had an enlightenment experience that was typical insofar as being described, with the blinding flash of light, instant connection to everybody and all of that kind of stuff, I know that there's a layer in this that goes back to the Jain idea of it is not either or. It is both and. So my brother both reincarnates and would be available to me in the greater consciousness should I die now. Because, for instance, the consciousness that you experience is not the sum total of the consciousness that you have. You have to think of the planets in the universe as I think of as the materium. And the materium is where we go to play our virtual games. So you exist outside of the materium in spite of the fact that you exist within the materium. And so if I were to look for my brother now, I might find that he had reincarnated with the Mongolian hordes because he always had a fascination with horses and wanted to work that out. Okay? But at the same time, if I died now, I could go, because the process of death is the removal of this little pseudopodia of consciousness within the materium, and that's all it is, I would go back out to the greater consciousness that I share with all other beings, and there would be that greater consciousness component of my brother. So I could indeed experience him that way. If I then came back into the illusionary world of the materium, I might, under those circumstances, think that, and it would make sense for me to perceive my experience of my brother as he was all there, because I experienced him as being all there. And so it would never occur to me that what I was experiencing was actually his greater whole, and that the part of him that I had lived with all these years in the materium had in fact gone off to live with a bunch of people in Mongolia and deal with horses. Make sense?
It does.
Okay, so now getting back to the idea of the whole transmigration of souls, I don't buy. Okay, because the transmigration of souls is part of the mind control effort that used to exist around the whole idea of reincarnation, that somehow your soul was a discrete entity like a paramecium, and it had its little rotifers out there, and it rotated around and would go from body to body to body. And my view does not express itself that way. I prefer to think of things in the reverse, that the bodies that we occupy here are in the materium for us to occupy, exist only for this particular purpose of us to have these experiences, and that the consciousness that is motivating this body cannot die, because it is part of the greater consciousness that is on the outside of and contributes to and creates the materium. And so it's very much like you're in a glove box, and when the hand is pulled out, the glove dies, but the hand isn't harmed or altered in any way by being extracted from the glove. And in fact, may have a rather pleasant experience that isn't quite so sweaty.
Okay. So anything that we could experience, we're experiencing perhaps all at once? Inside the materium and outside of it?
Okay, that is quite correct at many different levels. The materium, in and of its nature, is built in such a way that we experience things sequentially within how the mind of the glove cogitates about it.
Okay.
But that is only due to the way in which consciousness tries to deal with the materium itself from the greater sense outside it. So let's look at what's his name, Ian Lungold, in his great article on oh, geez, I can't think of the name of it now. Here it is, The Game of Lost.
Game of Lost Luck.
Correct. Just a great article that gives you a good perception of it. Now, what I do is I take his ideas expressed in that article, and I take them one step further. And I say that what he's talking about is the physical manifestation at a level we cannot perceive of a physical reality that is so fine that it eludes our senses, and that physical reality includes things like karma, good, bad, and indifferent. And that we can think of the materium not as a big square box, but like a round aquarium, and we're all inside this round aquarium, and pressed on the outside of the round aquarium all around us is the greater giant consciousness, of which we are a willing participant. And we are not in any way separated from the greater giant consciousness that we do not choose to experience. And it gets very much more complicated from there on. But basically, the reason that we reincarnate is to deal with the results of the actions that we set loose in the materium as part of the greater game that we can see a greater percentage of from our larger consciousness looking through the outer sphere of the materium down into its little core that we experience as the little consciousness.
Wow, okay. Do you ever think that we have the choice to not reincarnate here physically on planet Earth?
Sure. And we have the choice to reincarnate in a number of different ways. There's nothing to say that there isn't a reincarnation from your little consciousness that you're experiencing right now may decide that it needs to deal with its karma in a particular way as a platypus creature on another planet somewhere, and it's going to have a lovely time doing so. And it may be that it's a recreational thing, even for all I know.
Sure.
But there is nothing to say that doesn't occur. And in fact, those beings within the Materium who've gone to the trouble of spending their lives to categorize all of this, including the Jain and the Taoist and so on, also point out in like the 6 yogas of, I think his name is, the 6 yogas would get it in a search of somebody. I can't think of his name at the moment. Email me going. But anyway, in those 6 yogas, they point out you don't have to reincarnate at all should you choose not to. And that here's what you're going to face when you die and you go through the bardo. And basically that's another layer of illusion to see if it can't trick you into dealing with your karma coming back into another body, but you need not. And that if you're willing to accept it and face it, then that's your choice at that point. And that's one of the things I will do at this point to see if I'm ready in the passing into this through this next veil of death, if I'm ready to try the non-corporeal dealing with karma. It's a real bitch. I mean, it's a reason for coming back and dealing with karma at a physical level.
Right. Okay. Very interesting.
If you really want to get into karma down to the point of the gnat's ass, pursue the Jain philosophy, and you'll eventually come along in contact with these with the German Jain people who, because they're Germanic, love to categorize, and they categorize the hell out of karma. And it makes a lot of sense the way they did so.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your response. The next question is from forum member Lauren. Several years ago on an interview you did at the Mysteries of the Mind show, you recounted a bit of Eastern philosophy about a finite number of souls, which are split among the number of people on the earth. Eventually the souls must reconnect back to humans in the 1-to-1 ratio. I've never been able to track down this exact myth. Can you tell me where this came from, or perhaps tell it again with more detail?
It's not a myth. It was a paraphrasing of an understanding that's expressed both by the Buddhist and the what's known as the big raft Buddhists, as opposed to small raft Buddhism, which leads to Vipassana and so on. And it was expressed by the Buddhist and by the Tibetan. I can't think of. They're not really Buddhists, but the distinction is lost on most people. But they're Tibetan, and I have one of them. One of the discussions comes from a book by a guy whose last name is D-O-R-L-E, first name G-Y-U-M-E. He did the translation for it, and it's a version of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And in there they discuss the idea that you have a finite attachment to the materium. And there was also a discussion in, I think it was the Nag Hammadi, that arises from the Gnostic understanding, and their understanding mirrors that of the Egyptians. And so you'll find that there's a reference into the book of Going Forth by Day, which is mistranslated as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And if you get a good translation of it, it will discuss the idea that the Atman, as the Hindus call it, the basic substance or glue that binds the soul within the materium, has a finite stickiness. And so if you were to, for instance, be a depressed soul and you reincarnated constantly and killed yourself constantly, you'd eventually wear out your stickiness and wouldn't be able to participate in the materium anymore. Make sense?
It does make sense. So
okay.
Even through that level, if somebody is constantly depressed and they're constantly committing suicide, then they're not aware that they can move to a higher level, that they don't have to keep repeating that? Correct.
They are so aware. And in fact, you find the level of delusion appears predictably, and that's a particular level of delusion that leads people to get caught